Hello and welcome to the last in the 10 botanical skills webinars that are part of the Botanical Skills project in Northern Ireland, funded by DAERA, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland. The aims of the project are to support and upskill all botanists of any level, whether complete beginners or very experienced, in Northern Ireland, and to and hopefully bring more people into the world of plants and facilitate their capacity to learn more and to see more plants in the field. So this webinar was originally scheduled for the 26th of November last year, and it's getting started with plant keys. I'm Jen Farrar. I work for the BSBI as the Botanical Skills Officer for the Northern Ireland project. So just imagine you're out for a lovely summer's walk and you come across a field full of the most delightful flowers, wildflowers, and you wanted to find out what they were. You might recognize some of them. You might sort of recognize that these red flowers are probably poppies. If you're quite knowledgeable, you might realize that you might find that there are more than one species of poppy here. However, whenever it comes to the pink flowers, that might not be quite so easy. So where do we start? Do we start with our red flowers? We think we know what they are, so that's a good place to start. Have a look to see if they're poppies. Do we start with the pink flowers? Slightly more challenging, possibly. There's at least 2 species of pink flower there. Or the yellow flowers. They could all be one species. There might be 2 different species of shrub with yellow flowers there at the moment, but until we get up close and personal, it's difficult to see. And then there's all these white flowers. Some of them are umbels. These ones are in the foreground predominantly, and some of them at the back here are probably daisies. Got more umbels over here by the hedge. Can we be sure that they're all the same species of daisy and all the same species of umbel? Difficult to say. And then, of course, there's all these other flowering plants in between, these green ones with the grasses, the sedges, the rushes, the things that aren't quite in flower yet or have very small flowers, which are sort of don't have the colourful petals like the other flowers we've been looking at so far. So how would you go about it? Well, you could play snap, and many of us started by playing snap. I certainly did, and I know some extremely good botanists who that's exactly how they started in their botanical life. They went through the books that they had and found the picture that was most like the plant that they had seen, and they did that until they knew the whole book, pretty much. And then they moved on to slightly more challenging things like mosses at the age of 8. But they're fairly exceptional to be able to do that. Most of us sort of take a while to get going and to build up that level of confidence. If you were to Google native British wildflowers, you would get this plethora of lots of different types of flower, different colours, different sizes, different shapes. And it is not always easy to determine one thing from another. If you wanted to use your flower guide, you could do so. For example, this flower guide has got a page of the poppies that are found in the British Isles, Britain and Ireland. We have the common poppy is the typical red one. Another typically red one is the long-headed poppy. So that's Papaver roas and Papaver dubium. If you were to look online to see other pictures sort of actual plants, you might come across something like this, which suggests that there are black dots at the bottom of the petals. That's a fairly, that character doesn't always exist in a live specimen. So it's a difficult character it's a tricky character to rely on. The same for dubium. They tend to be slightly more scarlet rather than red. But again, unless you have the two together to compare, it's a tricky character to rely on. So how to be confident in your identification? Ideally, use a key. The key I'll be using throughout this webinar are the keys in the Collins Wildflower Guide, second edition by Streeter, Hart Davis, Hardcastle, Cole and Harper. It's a very good flower guide. It encompasses all the vascular plants that you'll find in Britain and Ireland, everything from equisetums and club mosses right through to sedges, rushes, grasses, orchids, etc., and everything in between. It isn't as fully comprehensive as something like Clive Stace's book. It doesn't have a lot of the hybrids, etc. So for a more accomplished botanist, it's possibly not as useful as other books might be. But for people who are starting out and intermediate in their skill level, it's a very good book. I use it quite a lot in the flowering season, and the keys are relatively accessible. And the glossary with all the botanical terminology and etc. that you will find throughout the book is good. So if we would go to the page beside all our pictures of poppies, we would find that there was a key. Flowers red, lilac or white. We have papaver straight away. Flowers yellow takes us somewhere else. If we follow that down a bit, our flowers usually lilac, leaves glaucous, which means a sort of grey blue, would bring us to this lovely thing, the opium poppy, which has a much more globular seed pod. For our common poppy and our long-headed poppy, however, it's the character of the seed pod here which is important in the key, which is the capsule is glabrous or hairless, in other words. It doesn't have any hairs on it. So that's the character that separates those two out. And whenever it comes to separating those, it's to do with the capsule size. The capsule in common poppy is slightly longer than it is wide, and in the long-headed poppy, it is much longer than it is wide. And in the common poppy, you have a latex sap, which is a white to creamy color. If it's yellow or orange, then it's a plant which isn't illustrated in this book, but is the yellow juiced poppy, which is possible. You might find it if you were in the south of England or Ireland, but for the purposes of today, it isn't illustrated, so we're not going to worry about it. But how is it best to start using a wildflower guide or key if you really want to get to determine the actual species of the plant you're looking at and be sure about it? How do you get used to it? How do you make yourself comfortable with going through the process? I would always recommend, whether it's you're an absolute beginner and just beginning to use keys and sort of wanting to take yourself through the steps of doing so with as little pain and as possible, or if you're buying a new book or are interested in buying a new book, this process is what I would always recommend. Start with flowers and plants that you know. So for example, here we have a daisy, but it could be a dandelion or a buttercup or something similar. Look up the common name in the book's index. So we have daisy here. We've also oxeye daisy and Shasta daisy, but we just have daisy. So we go to page 502. And that takes us to this picture page with daisy in the top left corner, Bellis perennis, here we are. So check the picture. Daisy has a basal rosette of leaves. It has flowers on single flowers on long stalks, which are hairy, and we have white and yellow flowers. So remember that in the daisy family, in Asteraceae, all these flowers are individuals. So each of these white rays is a single flower, and in the middle they've got lots of little tiny tubular yellow flowers. Also read your description, the description of the plant and the size and shape of its flowers and leaves, where it grows, the habitat, and also what its distribution is. So it's native and common throughout Britain, the British Isles, or Britain and Ireland. Especially whenever you're dealing with plants which look very similar. So for example, the forget-me-nots, it can be very important to read your descriptions of each, whether you're using a key or not, because some of them will probably not be found in the habitat that you're in, or have a very limited distribution or very limited flowering time. So reading the description is always an important part of using any key or flower guide. Have a look through the other plants in the same family. Do you recognize any of them? What characteristics do they share? Flowers, seeds, leaves, etc. So for example, let's take dandelions. We have dandelions here on this page with other similarly flowered things. Wall lettuce has similar flowers, but very tiny ones, only a few flowers per head. We have the lovely fox and cubs, and another Pilosella, Mycia hawkweed, for example, you might be familiar with if you live somewhere where it's sort of sandy and dry or near dunes. So our typical dandelion flower head, seed pod, we have our typical dandelion seed here. All looks fairly familiar. You can kind of compare that to the living thing and see that you're actually talking about the same sort of thing. You've got your lobed leaf and your lots and lots of yellow ray florets, each with an individual flower. And if we then look at our description, then we can see that yes, that all fits with what I'm seeing. Dandelion is a sort of one of the interesting groups that advanced and determined botanists reach for whenever they've sort of got bored with everything else, as they are self-fertile and called apomix. So you get lots of microclones of microspecies of clonal dandelions. But that's another story for another day. Then we have things like groundsel. So these groundsel is in the genus Senecio, and we've also got things like the Oxford ragwort, heath ragwort, Welsh groundsel, sticky groundsel, etc., Eastern groundsel, as well as they use, yeah, that'll come back to me. Groundsel is Senecio vulgaris. It's erect, irregularly branching annual. In fact, you will often see 2 or 3 generations of groundsel growing throughout the season. Pinnately lobed leaves with cottony hairs. Yes, we can see the cottony hairs here and those pinnately lobed leaves. The flowering heads are really quite small and discoid. So discoid just means that all the flowers in the flowering head are these small tubular flowers. And the outer bracts are black-tipped. Yes, we can see all that. A ubiquitous weed of waste grounds, gardens, arable fields, etc. Well, that certainly fits. Is also found on dunes, shingles and cliffs, and it's native throughout the British Isles. So that all works for us, and it flowers from January to December. So it's a flower that you are likely to find right through the year at some stage of flowering. So shared family characteristics in the daisy family. We have all these bracts at the back of the flower. Each of those is called an involucre bract. In the daisy, they're sort of quite rounded and hairy. In the groundsel, they're long, thin, and without hairs. And in the dandelion, they are variously shaped and sized and curved, etc., and tend to be hairless. The flower head is composed of many tiny flowers. You can just about see all these individual little tiny flowers in the daisy. The white petals, the white flowers on the outside actually are sterile. They're there to attract our pollinators. The inside flowers are the fertile ones. You can see all these lovely stigmas coming out of these senecio flowers, and then we've got this pappus forming. This is the hairs that carry the seeds. And the same in the dandelion, we've got all these lovely curled stigmas coming out from many of the flowers in the center. And again, our outer rows of petal of flowers will be sterile in dandelion as well. So we can see this better if we cut the flowers in half. The receptacle and the daisy, this lovely conical shape with the seeds attached to it and our flowers sitting on top of the seeds. So this is an inferior ovary. With the groundsel, again, we have an inferior ovary. The seeds are right at the base here on the receptacle. And we have this, we have those long hairs, those pappus hairs that we also see in dandelion, with the tubular flower coming up between them and then opening up and producing the little stigmas. And here we have a slightly more mature one where the seeds have developed and the pappus is developing and becoming enlarged and drying out, ready for the seeds to be released. And down the line, of course, we have this large plate with lots of seeds sitting on it, and each of those seeds is going into a tubular flower, but also we have the pappus, those hairs, which we're all familiar with in terms of a dandelion clock. The seed with its long beak and the pappus of hairs, which whenever these are all mature and ready to be released into the wind, those will open up into that lovely globe of dandelion seeds that we all still love to blow, and children especially. So if we went to the main key for the daisy family, we would have a description of what the daisy family is, what the characteristics that you would find within the family, and then some illustrations of how you could expect the typical daisy family flower to look. We have our flat receptacle with all our seeds sitting on it and the flower sitting on top of the seeds. We have potentially our outer ray florets on the edge of the flower, and inside we have our disc florets. So this would be your typical daisy-like flower. We have our involucra bracts on the outside of the receptacle. And then sometimes inside we might have what's called a receptacle scale. And that can be an important diagnostic character for some species. So it's an important thing to remember to look for if you get to the key and it asks for that. So our tubular flowers. We have two types of tubular flower. This one, which has 5 elongations at the top, which are our petals, is most commonly found in the thistle group of the daisy family. Most of the other discoid, sort of in the daisy, the senecio or groundsel, for example, have these smaller tubular flowers, which don't have these long elongations of the petals at the top. They just have the little tiny points. And then, of course, we have our ray floret, which is, again, it's made up of 5 petals in the same way the disc floret and the tubular floret are, but they've fused into one long petal-like structure to one side of the flower, giving what we commonly see in the outer rim of the daisies and also, of course, the dandelions. And there we have, of course, we have our pappus. And the pappus changes, has different characteristics across the different genera and species within the daisy family. So let's go through our key and find our 3 species, our daisy, our dandelion, and our groundsel. So first of all, we have, just to, like I said, these tubular florets with these elongated petals, are nearly always blue or purple, and they belong to the thistle groups. So they have thistle-like heads. So we're going to discount that type of tubular floret for now. Then we have our daisies. So our daisy florets, the outer florets are like this, the inner florets are like this. And if we go down through the key, we have flower heads ligulate with ray florets only, dandelion-like. Okay, so it's not that. We've decided that we don't have just a discoid with tubular florets only. We have both ray florets and disc florets and tubular florets. Then down here we have flower heads radiate with both ray florets and tubular florets, daisy-like. Always a giveaway. Then it asks us whether the ray florets are yellow or not yellow. Well, ours are white, so they're not yellow, so we go to key F. Key F with flower heads radiate with both ray florets and tubular florets, daisy-like, ray florets not yellow. We have basal leaves. All our leaves are at the base of the plant. We don't have a pappus of hairs, so the pappus of hairs is absent. There's no hairs attached to the tops of our seeds. So that takes us down to 5, and that's leaves, all basal, flowering heads solitary, and that takes us to bellis. Back to 502, and we can see we have our solitary flower heads, basal leaves, and that's our lovely bellis perennis. Dandelion-like, so flower heads ligulate with ray florets only. Tells us exactly dandelion-like, so we can be fairly confident that this is the right key for us. So we go to key A. Key A tells us, reiterates for us that flower heads are ligulate with ray florets only, dandelion-like. Flower heads yellow or orange, go to 2. Florets without a pappus of hairs or florets with a pappus, so we definitely have a pappus, so that takes us to 4. Then we have all leaves linear lanceolate and entire, or all leaves not linear lanceolate and entire. So this is a linear lanceolate leaf that they're talking about for the, this is a tragopogon, the goat's beard. However, our leaves are not linear lanceolate, they are lobed. They are an entire leaf, but they're heavily lobed leaf, mostly. So that takes us to 6. Flowering stems leafless or with few scale leaves may have leafy runners, or flowering stems leafy. Well, this is our flowering stem. As you can see, it is entirely leafless. So that takes us to 7. Flowering stems hollow and glabrous. Glabrous, we've come across that before. That means hairless. And we can see that our flowering stem is fairly much hairless and it's hollow. And also dandelion has this white latex. So that takes us to dandelion that we've already looked at. But what about our groundsel? We have flower heads that discoid with tubular flowers only. We have quite small disc florets. If we go through, so we don't have conspicuous thistle-like heads of purplish or blue. We don't have leaves and stems with white cottony hairs, leaves simple and entire flower heads yellowish to pale brown, often small and conspicuous. So this would be the cudweeds, if you are interested to know where that would take us. And then what we have are leaves and stems not covered by white cottony hairs, or if cottony, then leaves much divided. We don't have cottony leaves. There are some cotton-like hairs, but they're not very fully covered by those hairs. So that takes us to key D. If we go to key D, flower heads are discoid, leaves and stems not covered by white cottony hairs, or if cottony, leaves much divided. So our first couplet are leaves large, all basal, rounded to cordate. Cordate meaning heart-shaped at the base. This is a word you would find in the glossary if you weren't sure. And the leaves would also be long-stalked. So, or the other option is leaves not all basal and cordate. So our leaves go right up our stem, and they're certainly not heart-shaped at their base, and they're not long-stalked. This leaf is sessile to the stem. In other words, it attaches directly to the stem. There is a very little, or there is no or very short stem for the leaf. So that takes us to couplet 3. All leaves alternate, or at least lower leaves opposite. Well, this is pretty much the whole of a plant, and as you can see, these leaves are nicely alternate going up the stem. So that takes us to 4. Leaves pinnate. So pinnate would be like a rose leaf, for example, where or an ash leaf or an elder leaf, tree leaf, where you have a single leaf which is compound, so you've got leaflets along its edge, and each of those leaflets is not attached to the other leaflets, and the material of the leaflet is not does not continue along the midrib. So leaves pinnate or pinnately divided. Pinnately divided would be lobed in such a way that if more leaf material was lost, it would become a pinnate leaf. Flowering heads, small, inconspicuous, usually in long, loose inflorescences, and that would be Artemisia, which is the wormwoods. If you wanted to sort of to flick and see what they look like, you could easily do so. If flowering heads are small and inconspicuous, then leaves not pinnately divided. So we have flowering heads which are relatively small and relatively inconspicuous, and our leaves are somewhat pinnately divided. But when this is not as defined a couplet as one might like. But we're definitely not in this group of the Artemisias, and we don't have the option to go beyond. We have to keep on going. So we're in group 5. We go to couplet 5, which asks us whether our leaves are simple, entire, or toothed. So a simple entire leaf would be something like a dock leaf or a beech leaf. A toothed leaf would be a simple entire or toothed. The entire bit is the edge, so whether the edge is smoothed or toothed. A simple leaf is one that is not lobed or divided in any way. So we don't have a simple leaf that's entire or toothed. We have a leaf that is pinnately lobed or divided. So that takes us down to number 8. And like I said before, if you're not sure that what you're looking at is the right thing, go and have a look at these genera that come out before couplet 8. So the asters, Inula, Coniza. But we're asked to go to couplet 8. So we have florets with a pappus of hairs or florets without a pappus of hairs. We have a florets with a pappus of hairs, and that takes us to senecio. There is a little bit more to go with this key, but I've stopped it here for the sake of economy. So we're going to go and have a look at the key for senecios. So this is our key for senecio, the ragworts. Ragwort used to be a senecio. It's now in its own genus, but that's fine. So let's get going. At least some leaves deeply lobed to more than halfway to rib, go to 2. So we can see that we have deep lobes. Some of them go almost almost all the way down to the midrib. Some not quite. So our leaves are definitely deeply lobed. Excuse me. So that takes us to 2. Leaves densely white felted beneath or woolly, or leaves glabrous or sparsely hairy beneath. We can just catch little glimpses of the underside of the leaf on this photograph. And they're certainly not densely hairy. So we can happily go with the idea that our leaves are glabrous or sparsely hairy beneath. And that takes us to couplet 3. Excuse me. The options we have here are whether or not we have glandular hairs present. Well, we know we have some hairs, but those hairs don't appear to have any glands on them. If they did, they would look like this. Glandular hairs have a little globlet of sticky something or other, a sticky substance usually at the end. And these are a way of preventing things like ants from coming up and damage, or other plant flower eating insects coming up and damaging the flowers. And they're very effective. You see them in lots of different plants. And basically, if the plant feels sticky to touch or has got things stuck to it, then it is likely to have glandular hairs. This particular plant, which is the sticky groundsel, Senecio vesicosa, is quite reliably one of the stickiest ones in the genus. So that takes us to couplet 4. Heads with ray florets, conspicuous, not revolute. Revolute just means curled over on themselves, a bit like the shape of these stigmas up here. So they would be curling back on themselves. So we don't have ray florets, and even if we did, they're not conspicuous. So we have heads with ray florets absent or short, less than 7 millimeters. Excuse me. And if we did have ray florets, they would be curled back on themselves. So that takes us to couplet 9. We have heads of 4 to 5 millimeters across, ray florets usually absent, or if present, then less than 5 millimeters. Or heads to 15 millimeters across, radiate ray florets 4 to 7 millimeters. So radiate means it has ray florets. We just have the disc florets. So we have the Senecio vulgaris, which is what we have here. And if it were the other, the Senecio cambrensis, this is what we would be looking at instead. Still got the relatively smooth, elongated involucral bracts with the black tips, which is classic of Senecio, the genus. And we have our tubular flowers in the center, like we do with our groundsel. But we have these very distinctive bright yellow ray florets around the edge of the flower. And our leaves are slightly different as well. But those flower characteristics are enough for us to say, yeah, that's definitely not what we have. We have the first one, the Senecio vulgaris. So I hope that has helped go sort of get a feel of how the keys might work for something you know. Persevere, and always make sure that you use the glossary at the back, because it's a great help. One thing to bear in mind, regardless of any key, even the most user-friendly key, and ones which have been designed to make it to make plants as accessible as possible, is that they can make some big assumptions about your knowledge set and your capacity to recognize differences and similarities in flowers and plants. One of the things they often assume is that you know a flower when you see a flower. So, for example, here we would, all of us, I think, would probably say that, yes, quite happily, we've got this beautiful bluish purple flower back here, which is unfortunately out of focus. This is Viper's bugloss, by the way. However, in the foreground, the thing that the photograph has been taken of are these, this is plantain, lanceolate plantain, Plantago lanceolata, and it has lots of little flowers. They have 4 petals, the little brown star shape. Next time you see a lanceolate plantain flowering with these lovely yellow stamens sticking out, have a look. They're really quite beautiful in their reserved way. And there's lots of them all crammed together on this very compact flower heads, which looks initially like it could be a grass flower head, admittedly, but isn't. Then we have our grass flowers. These are flowers, they're very reduced flowers. Predominantly, it's made up of lots of large male stamens producing lots of pollen, and then our little feathery female stigmas sitting in amongst all the green parts of the spikelet, the individual flowers of the spikelet. But these are flowers as well. These are male catkins of the hazel tree, which produce masses of amounts of dry pollen to be for wind pollination. And then these little red, crimson little starfish, little sea anemone-like flowers, they are our female flowers of the hazel. And they usually sit in an inflated bud at the base of the catkin, where the catkins are. So an important characteristic to remember. Excuse me, I'm just going to turn my audio off for a second and have a good cough. Sorry about that. So another big assumption that can be made is that you know that some plants have seeds but not flowers. So, for example, the conifers, they, as I'm sure you're aware, have cones. They have male and female cones, usually on the same tree, not always. This is a beautiful Scots pine with these wonderful sort of cinnamon orange upper stems. The female cones are the ones that bear the seeds, and they're the ones that we find on the floor. The male cones only produce pollen, and then they sort of shrivel and fall off. So they're only around during the reproductive time for the plant. Other plants that have cones and usually have male and female plants are the cycads, for example. We don't have those as natives, unfortunately, but they produce huge female cones and huge male cones in the center of the rosette of leaves. So that difference between a plant which produces flowers and seeds and plants which only produce seeds but don't have flowers is an important one, as is knowing that some plants don't have flowers or seeds. So here we have three groups of vascular plants. So you would find them in, for example, the Collins Flower Guide. We have ferns, we have horsetails, and we have club mosses. In ferns, the spores are often developed on the back of the leaf. And in the case of this polypody, they don't have a little covering, they just have lots of little sort of spheres full of spores, which are then released as the season goes on. Here we have a patch of field horsetail, Equisetum arvensis. These pale brownish bodies are the sporing bodies, which will release their green spores and then disappear. And the vegetative part of the plant, these green parts, will continue to grow through the summer and into the autumn. And in the club mosses, this is Hupertia. The sporing bodies are these sort of scale-like structures on the plant, which are elevated up so they get some wind flow across them. So that distinction is an important one. So how do you go about finding these things out if it's not something that you're particularly familiar with? Well, I would recommend that you use something like this book, the British and Irish Wildflowers and Plants Pocket Guide. This is not a key. This is a guide to help you start to understand and being able to differentiate between plants and flowers based on their characteristics. So it runs you through the different the groups of plants. We have non-vascular plants, which aren't in this book, and most aren't in most flower guides. Most flower guides are restricted to vascular plants only, so those with a a system throughout the plant which actually transports water and nutrients from the roots. So we have bryophytes, which are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. And then we have our non-flowering vascular plants, so our ferns, horsetails, club mosses, etc. Our gymnosperms, which are conifers. And then we get into our vascular plants, which flower. So we have our angiosperms. We have some which are called pre-dicots. And we have our dicots, which are things like roses, buttercups, dandelions, daisies. And then we have our monocots, which tend to be things like lilies, bluebells, grasses, sedges, rushes, things like that. Non-plants are things like fungi or lichens or algae. But they show you these things nicely to give you a visual reference point. So we have our different bryophytes, and then of course we have our vascular plants at the base here. It tells you about the broad groups that you'll find in this book. So we have our ferns, which are club mosses and our horsetails. We have our conifers, our gymnosperms. We have our non-plants which aren't green, so they tend to be parasitic plants which don't have any chlorophyll at all. We have our water lilies and other aquatic plants, and then we have our angiosperms. So we can see quite a diversity of different angiosperms here. We have our dicots, which are those ones in the darker red, the daisy, the poppies, the plantain, the spurges, docks. That's dodder, which is another parasitic plant, so it's also not a green plant. Our carrot family, the pea family, orchids, the pea family, these are all dicots, and then we get into our monocots, those with one seed leaf, which is our orchids, our grasses, rushes, and sedges. And we also have woody plant trees and shrubs, or woody climbers. Takes you through the different structures that you will find in a flower and the terminology for those flowering parts. So, a flower with multiple lines of symmetry is a radial flower. A flower with one line of symmetry is a bilateral flower, etc. Whether or not a flower is, the petals are joined together or not, whether the petals are entire, notched, or divided. Still one petal, but it's divided right down to the base. Whenever you have in the daisy family, how the structure of those flower heads is formed. The different types of inflorescence, spikes, racemes, panicles, etc. It takes you through a sort of a flow chart of how to get to the right group. If we have plants that aren't green, they tend to be for example, like this one, parasitic, the broom rapes and dodder. We also have things which can look not green at certain points in their life cycles. So, for example, the horsetails, they might have a non-green, sporing body. Or in winter, our trees don't tend to be green because they're completely dormant. So this is an ash twig, nice big black bud at the tip, and then opposite black buds further down on this lovely grey ash coloured bark. And coltsfoot, for example, is flowering at the moment, but it doesn't have any green. The leaves will come up shortly after the flowers are nearly finished. It takes you through the different types of trees, different types of woody climbers, and also the non-woody climbers. Gives you ideas of the types of flowers you might see on trees and shrubs, and also the fruit that you might find, the types of leaves, winter twigs. And then once we get into the non-woody herbaceous flowers, it takes you through those. So we have conspicuous flowers, inconspicuous flowers, and plants that seem to be lacking petals and sepals, which tend to be the docks and the spurges, the grasses, the sedges, and rushes. So conspicuous flowers, it takes you through the different things to be looking for. So petals free, petals fused but only at the base, or significantly fused. For example, what the symmetry is, again, where the ovary is positioned in relation to the rest of the plant and the receptacle, and also how to determine whenever what is what. What's a sepal, what's a petal. If you've got something that they all look the same, how do you determine those, etc. And also we have our herbaceous plant flowering galleries, all the different types of flower and the inflorescences you might find them in. We have flowers with inconspicuous or tiny sepals or petals, and then we have our plants with perceptibly no flowers, or with flowers which don't look like flowers. So it's an extremely useful little book, and I would highly recommend, if you're just starting out and wanting to learn the terminology and have it well illustrated, that you have a look at it. It does have species descriptions as well, but it doesn't cover all of the species within a genus. It does the more common ones to allow you to start gaining familiarity with those and understanding what it is that you're seeing confidently and with a great deal of support. So it's a great little book for that. So just the last minute or two of this talk, I just wanted to show you the books that I would use most commonly. These two are the books that I use nearly all the time if I'm looking at a plant. If I have flowers, I'm most likely to go through the Common Field Flower Guide. However, a lot of the time I use this one, the Vegetative Key to British Flora. It takes some getting used to, I have to admit, and but again, I would start with something like a daisy or a dandelion to make sure that I understood how the key worked. That is fundamental, I think, to learning how to use any new book that you purchase or borrow from the library or are lent by a friend. Is start with things that you recognize, you're confident you know what it is. And if you see something and you think, you know what, that reminds me of that bluebell I was looking at the other day, or that forget-me-not I was looking at the other day, or whatever it was. If you think you recognize what you have in front of you, trust your instincts. Have a look in the index, look it up, go to the part of the book where it is. It may be that it's an individual species from, the only species in a genus in the book, in which case that's great. But do trust your instincts. The more you trust your instinct, the better your database of information in your head gets. And that's what botanizing is all about, just like any other occupation where you are collecting lots of information and categorizing it away, putting together a database of information and facts and pictures and knowledge. These books help, but ultimately it's your observations which form that database and help and support you in your work, in your journey towards enjoying and identifying plants in the field more so. So as I say, these are my two go-to books for the most part. However, these are the books that I've used in the last 12 months. So I tend to use things like grasses of the British Isles and sedges, these two BSBI handbooks, as reference books. So if I've come to a conclusion using either the Collins Wildflower Guide or the Vegetative Key, and I just want to confirm, looking at the really excellent illustrations and descriptions in these two books, then I will go to those and use those. If I find something that doesn't quite fit, I might go to Stace and see what he says. However, Stace, while he covers all of the hybrids and so on, in the Britain and Ireland, he doesn't talk an awful lot about the vegetative characters, so which is why I tend to go to the vegetative key. Things like this little book on fumitories, another BSBI handbook, is if you're into fumitories, is a great little book, and again the keys are relatively accessible. Britain's Ferns is beautiful. That's all I can say about it. It's a great book. If you're at all interested in ferns, it's well worth having a look at. If you're just getting into ferns, then I would recommend the Field Studies Centre laminated pull-out sheet on ferns. It also has a key on the back written by this gentleman here, Mr. Merriweather, and it is an excellent resource, especially if you're going out in the field. And then, of course, there's a couple of aid gap books here, which I've also used on grasses, a guide to identification using vegetative characteristics, and also another James Merriweather book, The Fern Guide, which is a more flowchart type of key. And then we have this little pocket guide that I've just been looking at with you. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that has been helpful. If you have any questions about this webinar that you would like me to respond to, please do put them in the comments section of the YouTube video. I will endeavour to answer them as promptly as possible. If you would like any recommendations on books or other schemes which might help you get going with these things, or even advice about hand lenses and sort of what kind of hand lens you would need, etc., then please do ask me a question in the comments, and I will be very happy to help you out. Happy botanizing. The season is just getting started. There are some things out there to be looking at. So yeah, have fun looking at them, and don't be afraid to pull apart a flower or two and see what's going on inside, because that's the way you learn. I really hope you have enjoy looking at plants and have a great 2025. Thank you.